Okay, well, the report is coming, the personnel are coming out of middle from it now. It appears that it's about to happen. Also a little color, the streets in front of
around the front of this thing. All right, I'm going to get the other side here. Yeah, hopefully they'll pick up speed once we hit the freeway. I've lost you, Fox. Where you at? I'm eastbound along the north side of San Felipe. I'm at 700. Okay. I'm going to shoot over here to the loop. Okay. All right, I'm on the east side of the loop at 700. Okay. Kim, I don't see you. Oh, I'm about your 2 o'clock over by the loop. Oh, okay, I got you. feeling it. We're in the wrong spot for the wind. Yep. I'm hoping they pick up speed here. Well, I'm just hovering sideways. Suck it up, Buttercup. Boy, don't let me find you. Yeah, he's spoiled with all that power. Hey, Mike, y'all on the freeway yet? Yeah, they're Hearst just went over Westheimer. Motorcycles are coming up through Richmond. All right, we're down here at South Post Oak in the Loop. All right. I'm gonna turn around. Okay. Go to the other side of the freeway. Where you at? I don't see you now that I'm turned. Due east of the Transco. You stay on the inside of the loop, I'll stay on the outside. Okay. be on with the tower. I'm over here by NRG, kind of going out front, but I'm listening to local. Okay, thanks. Hey, Mike, you want me to call for both of us to the tower? Yeah, I'll do that. You got that right, Cam? Squawky pre-signed? I am. I'm following you. Okay. You gonna stay on the south side? I'll stay on the north side? Yeah. Hey, Cammy's calling you. I want you to stay outside the Bravo. Yeah, I got it. Motorcade at? It is coming up on Main. Coming up on Main, just passing over. Okay. We're held back over here. They're not letting us go any further. I don't know what happened. Yeah, I heard that. Well, a TFR for a past president is pretty cool. Yeah, right. But really, the only TFR is still at Ellington. Yeah, I'm a little, I don't know. What can I say? I'm here. All right, Kirk, I guess you heard that. We're going to catch back up here and get back with you for the time being.
That's clear. I'm over here at by Scott right now, just kind of going back and forth on the freeway, making sure it's open and clear.
Okay. Yeah, we're just passing over Astrodome.
Are they going to let you follow it all the way in?
We're going to have to stop probably about Edgebrook, 3 miles. They're not going to let us in there.
Okay.
And I got you up there.
13 position 2. Mike, what altitude you at?
I had you, but I don't see you now. Where are you?
I'm right off your right if you're talking to 13.
I got Kim. Kirk, I don't have you.
Yeah, Mike, I'm up here by Griggs. I'm in the curve by the HISD Stadium, 500 feet.
Okay, yeah, I guess you're just blended in there somewhere.
Are y'all staying back behind the motorcade?
Just kind of right, almost right, just barely, a little bit. Probably about 7 o'clock.
Okay, I'm trying to stay out ahead of it. We've had to flip around a couple of times to check on some things. But...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're with it now. I'm on the north side. Kim's back here about 5 o'clock on the south.
Okay, I'm just west of Gulfgate Mall now.
Oh, I got you over there now. Actually, I'm right here at the Gulf Freeway and just east of 45 on South Loop. I'll stay on the east side. Why don't you stay on the west side? I'll stay on the west side. You stay on the east side. Beautiful. I think I'm going to fly sideways all the way to Ellington. Good deal. Yeah, I was just looking at that.
This is an NBC News special report, remembering George H.W. Bush. Here's Lester Holt.
Good morning, everyone. We're coming on the air to begin our live coverage of the nation's farewell to George H.W. Bush, who died Friday at age 94. He is making the first leg of his final journey, accompanied by the extended Bush family. You're looking at the procession now making its way southeast of Houston to Ellington Field, where he will fly aboard an Air Force jet to Washington, D.C. On hand, his eldest son and former President George W. Bush. The body of our 41st president will arrive momentarily at Ellington Field. This was the departure from the funeral home just a little less than an hour ago. The former president will be flown from there aboard the plane to Washington, D.C. He will lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda. The death of a president, of course, is a rare event in American life. It last happened 12 years ago with the passing of Gerald Ford. And the death of Mr. Bush has prompted assessments of his presidency as well as of our current political moment. NBC political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, is with us for this coverage, along with NBC presidential historian John Meacham, who is the author of Destiny and Power, the American Odyssey of George Herbert Walker Bush. NBC political analyst Andrew Card was Secretary of Transportation under Bush 41 and Chief of Staff to Bush 43. George H.W. Bush served several presidents, notably Ronald Reagan as vice president, but it was Richard Nixon who played a big part in jumpstarting his national career, naming him United Nations ambassador after a failed Senate bid in 1970. Our own Tom Brokaw joins us this morning from the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California. But we want to start with Gabe Gutierrez. He's at Ellington Field there, where any moment we're expecting the arrival of the hearse carrying the former president. Gabe, set the scene for us.
Hi there, Lester. Good morning. Well, the aircraft behind me, typically known as Air Force One, today known as Special Air Mission 41. And as you mentioned, President Bush's casket is expected to arrive here on the tarmac in the next few minutes. And Honor Guard is prepared and ready to play Hail to the Chief, as well as a 21-gun salute. As you mentioned, on hand are his eldest son, President George W. Bush, as well as former First Lady Laura Bush. Other friends and family are expected for the 45-minute ceremony. Then the plane will head to Washington, and of course several commemorative events there throughout the week. Later in the week, he returns to Texas, and this is a place where he was not just a statesman and a politician, but a father and a neighbor. A pillar of the community. He and his family came here decades ago, built so much here, and then he will be taken to his final resting place on the grounds of his Presidential Library Museum in College Station, Texas. But just within the next few minutes, we're expecting his casket to arrive here and a send-off for the 41st President of the United States. Lester.
All right, Gabe, thank you. We got about 10 minutes now, we're told, the arrival of the procession of that motorcade. Let me bring on our panel right now. John Meacham, let me start with you. I was watching some of the coverage on the MSNBC side as the casket left the funeral home, and Kerry Sanders was talking to people who just stood out there, and they said, this was our neighbor. Talk about the strong Texas connection of this president and this family.
George Herbert Walker Bush, we wouldn't be sitting here if he had followed the conventional path. He went to war, came back, graduated from Yale in 1948. That summer, instead of going to Wall Street, he had a couple of offers. My favorite detail is that Procter & Gamble didn't give him a job. You wonder what they were looking for at that point. He could have gone to become an investment banker, lived in New York, a very conventional life, but he wanted to go into the oil business. As he once put it, quite honestly, we wanted to make a lot of money quick. And so they went to Odessa, Texas. Mrs. Bush's mother thought it was so far from civilization that she would send boxes of soap and detergent to her daughter. They moved to Midland, which was kind of the big city, and then in 1959 they moved to Houston. President Bush wanted to go in the offshore business, founded a company, and really that was the year their daughter Doro was born, and Houston became home for them for 60 years. People always joked that he was only there for tax purposes. He'd end up in Maine. He never had any intention of going anywhere but back to Texas in 1993.
Last time he was seen in public, election day, you know, with his neighbors, casting his ballot.
He was, what was so funny about being with him in Houston is you'd go to the barbecue place, you'd go to the restaurants that were almost all in strip malls, and people would bring out every course. They knew exactly what he wanted. Depending on the relative scale of the evening or the lunch, they would bring a martini or a beer. He loved it, and it's where he became friends with James Baker. It's where he became friends with so many people. Never won a statewide race until he ran for president in 1988, but he did represent the 7th District of Houston.
And there, pictured in the polling place, his service dog Sully with him. Chuck, we're about to start 3 days of intense morning, obviously the morning since Saturday, but as we look at this president, are we also looking at all this through a nostalgic eye, a nostalgic not only of this president, but of the way politics used to run in this town?
Well, in fairness, I think we always do that in a presidential funeral. We don't do this very often, as you pointed out. And when we do, it's the one moment where we're not a democracy. We actually do treat a president like a member of a monarch of sorts. We have this moment because I think we use this moment to assess where we are in the American story, where we are in this moment, where did this president fit into it, how did this president contribute to it. I do think it's more acute right now because of the current state we are with this president and the fact that it's such a stark contrast between the two men. Right, as we're talking about George H.W. Bush and the person that he is and the character that he is, obviously you can't help but compare it to the current president we have, and they're just two radically different people, completely different. We can, I don't think this is the time to get too deep into the Trump comparisons per se, but I do think because I think it's okay as a moment as Americans if we lift up in this moment and have this conversation, because again, this is what we do when presidents die.
Let me bring in Andy Card here. Andy, if you look at the accomplishments of this one-term president, the START Treaty, the success in the Gulf War, the Panama invasion, the fall of communism, if you knew nothing else, you might look at that and say, well, how come he was only one term? Did he ever? Did he ever go through that process?
That way. He did look at it that way.
Jim Baker sort of said that to me yesterday. Yeah.
Look, at President George H.W. Bush, I think, was an amazingly successful president. If you look at foreign policy, yes, that's easy, but even domestic policy, and it was particularly significant because he didn't have a Republican House or a Republican Senate, and he still got huge support for some very, very significant domestic issues. The Civil Rights Act of 1992. You had the Americans Disabilities Act, which changed the world.
Some say it should be part of the civil rights, the same
It is.
aspect.
It's a Civil Rights Act.
The Clean Air.
Yeah. Clean Air Act. He gave us, violating a campaign promise, he produced a budget deal, a spending deal that brought discipline to Congress, rather than just impose discipline on the executive branch. And it created surpluses for the first time for many, many, many years. He gave us so much in education, in health care, in child care. People don't pay attention to that because of the work that he did to prevent the Cold War from being a hot war.
This is why this is such an important week, though, Andy, what you just pointed out, because I do think Americans need to learn that George H.W. Bush got punished for compromising.
Yeah.
George H.W. Bush is a one-term president because he chose to work across the aisle. He chose to break a campaign promise. I mean, let's be realistic. It's the most famous campaign promise break ever. It set the Republican Party on a course that it is on today, for better or for worse. And again, that's a debate that we're going to continue.
And he didn't stumble into breaking his promise.
No, he sort of took it.
He kind of knew it.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing.
He acknowledged he had to do the right thing rather than the political thing.
Let me bring in Tom Brokaw, who was there for much of this history. Tom, what are your thoughts and what stands out to you as we begin these days of remembrances?
Well, I think these occasions are about the majesty and the complexities of American politics. I'm quite surprised that my friends around that table, all of my pals, didn't mention a very singular presence that kept George Bush from having a second term. That was Ross Perot, who got 19% of the vote. He was a fellow Texan who took on the establishment. That hurt the president terribly when he was running for re-election against Bill Clinton. I'm here at the restored Nixon Library in his hometown of Yorba Linda, California, and I must tell you, they've done a remarkable job of showing us both the accomplishments and the dark side of that president. George Bush was his ambassador to China. He was also the chair of the Republican National Committee. And when the tapes came out showing Nixon in his darkest moments, George Bush was appalled by what he read. But when he became president and they dedicated this library, he came back and paid high praise to the president. We have a photo, I think, of them all standing on the lawn, including Ronald Reagan. And he talked about Richard Nixon's influence on creating a Republican Party in Texas. And George Bush went to Congress as a result of Nixon's attention to that state. So once again, we have the complexities of American presidential politics, the bright side and the very dark side as well. And you have the apotheosis of that in this library, celebrating the Richard Nixon election as President of the United States in 1968, 50 years ago, this November. So stop and think about it. We are always a dynamic society. There are so many parts that play in our American politics, and not all of them always fit together neatly and give us the kind of mosaic that we'd like to have. So despite, I know that George Bush had real reservations about this president, but he did pay high praise to him.
All right, Tom, I want to bring in Anita McBride, if I can. She served as assistant to President George W. Bush and chief of staff to First Lady Laura Bush from 2005 to 2009. Anita, thanks so much for being with us. This family has been through it's been an enormous year for them. How have they dealt with all this?
Well, I think you have two colleagues around the table there who know that very well, too. John Meacham and Andy Card are arguably one of the closest people to this family, and I'm honored to be on this today with them and with Mr. Brokaw, too. You know, the reflections, I think, for all of us in these past 7 months have really been very deep, and such a reminder of how lucky and how privileged all of us were to be a part of their lives. This is a beautiful family, and this was a beautiful man, and Barbara Bush was a beautiful woman, and they gave us such examples of courage, patriotism, love of country, of friends, of family, all the good things in life that all of us would want. And I think they're all also very heartened and encouraged by all the wonderful, well-deserved tributes and recognition of George and Barbara Bush, and the legacy of service that they have had not only to their local community, but to the country and to the world. And I think it's just such an honor and privilege to have even a few moments to share that on behalf of myself, my own family, or the trajectory of my life and my husband's life, as Andy knows because he was there through a lot of it with us, is in great part due to the Bushes, and particularly to George Bush. So on behalf of so many of the thousands of people and former staff members who've worked for President Bush and were part of this wonderful time that he served the country, we are all, you know, feeling the loss, but also so proud of the tributes that he is getting now, because they are so well deserved.
Well, Anita, we appreciate you being part of our panel. We'll be including you in the discussions as we go along. We do want to set the scene, though, for folks at home. We are moments away from the arrival of the procession, the motorcade carrying the body of President George H.W. Bush. There is the airplane that will carry him to Washington. If it looks familiar, yes, it's part of the Air Force One fleet. However, it is not carrying a sitting president, so it will thus, in this case, be known as SAM 41. Special Air Mission 41 will be the call sign. But that plane, this version of Air Force One, actually, President George H.W. Bush was the first president to fly aboard what was then a new fleet of Air Force One aircraft that will soon be
You know, Lester, it's worth pointing out that in many ways, George H.W. Bush planted the seed, the first Republican seed in the state of Texas. And today, the state of Texas is the heart and soul of the Republican Party. And it took, you know, the Republican Party was Thomas Dewey, was the New England, was the New York's, was the upper crust, right, with this New England patrician party. And George H.W. Bush was sort of the first immigrant, if you will, from New England to the Sun Belt. And look, lo and behold, look at the party today.
That's one of the marvelous things about his life, because if in many ways the country has been governed from 1932 to 2016 by a kind of figurative conversation between FDR and Reagan, even President Obama governed under that, then the George H.W. Bush and his son's story is both a mirror and they were both a mirror and a maker of that political journey. Senator Prescott Bush, senator from Connecticut, very much a New England Republican. George H.W. goes to Texas. He was the first sane seed of Texas politics.
I said he was the seed.
I said, well, but there was one.
Don't forget, seeds get wild.
I'm saying, there was one Republican congressman who was But one of the ways Bush came into the story was to drive the John Birch Society, an extremist Cold War. They thought that George Marshall and Dwight Eisenhower and FDR were communist conspirators.
Well, they were really big in Dallas. It was more of a bigger problem in Dallas than it was Houston back in the day.
And it was George H.W. Bush who, as chairman, his first elected job was as chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. And he drove the John Birch Society out. He ran in '64. And then was in the House from '66 to '70. But he was, I think, if I can tell one quick story about Tim McBride, Anita's wonderful husband, who was the body man for George H.W. Bush for a long time. And to give you some sense of the man's innate courtesy, on the day of George H.W. Bush's inauguration as President of the United States, he had decided not to wear a top coat. And they got, and Tim McBride had said, do you want me to bring your coat? And Bush said no. They get to the Capitol, Reagan is all bundled up. So Bush turns to Tim and says, where's my top coat? And Tim said, well, you told me not to bring it. And Bush says, I can't walk out there and show him up as if he's some old guy. Give me your coat. And so George Herbert Walker Bush walked to the pinnacle of power wearing Tim McBride's overcoat.
But that says something about him, what you just said.
You're seeing in the distance there the what appears to be the arrival, at least on the base itself, the reserve base there of the motorcade. There will be an official departure ceremony. You're going to be hearing the term military precision a lot over the next 72 hours or so, because this is essentially a military operation in terms of the timing, in terms of the ceremony that you're about to see before the casket is put aboard.
Should remind people, this stuff is planned years in advance. Andy Card, you've been involved
30 years.
You've been involved in 2 administrations. How often have you been involved?
It's a sensitive issue.
No, this is literally from when he was still president. They talked about his funeral.
They call it the book. There's a binder.
There's a binder.
You as Chief of Staff, how often did you go over it with even other presidents every once in a while, right?
It's very common. I remember being, when I was Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, when President Reagan died, the president was in Paris. And I knew the book. I knew the book.
Well, the other thing,
what had to happen.
And the thing with given longevity, you know, in President Reagan's case, he outlived almost all his pallbearers, so they had to they keep.
They had to update the book.
I want to go to Peter Alexander. Peter, standing by with some news. Peter, what do you got?
Yeah, Lester, well, we have just heard from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who, of course, had clashes with the Bush family, specifically Jeb Bush, during the 2016 campaign. But just moments ago, as we watched the motorcade arrive there at the base in Texas, we heard from the President on Twitter, of course, saying, looking forward to being with the Bush family to pay my respects to President George H.W. Bush. We know at 5 o'clock Eastern Time this evening, the Vice President Mike Pence will deliver remarks when the former President, 41, lies in state at the Capitol. It's possible that the President of the United States would make a trip there as well, and there are plans in place perhaps to have the two families visit before Wednesday's funeral. Back to you.
All right, Peter Alexander at the White House. Thanks very much. As the hearse comes into view, the motorcade onto the field. This, by the way, Ellington Field is the home of the Texas Air National Guard unit that President George W. Bush belonged to when he served in the military in the Texas National Guard. He flew out of this very base. The ceremony will be fairly brief compared to what is planned for later in the week, but there will be an official departure ceremony. We don't believe any remarks, but we will see the family. A good number of family will actually be boarding that Air Force VIP aircraft for the trip to Washington, D.C., and then we will see another ceremony and a procession when they arrive in Washington this afternoon, and the former president is taken to the Capitol to lie in state. Let me go back to Tom Brokaw as we await the procession to make its way to the aircraft. Tom, some other thoughts?
One of my thoughts is, obviously, by the way, it was President Ford, not President Nixon, who put George Bush in the American embassy in China. But George Bush's presence in Texas and his involvement in the Republican Party delivered a great dividend to this country. He persuaded his tennis partner, Jim Baker, to leave the Democratic Party and become a Republican. And he became Secretary of State. He became White House Chief of Staff. He's highly regarded as the gold standard in all the jobs that he had. And on President Bush's final day, Jim Bush was at his side 3 different times. It was a relationship and a partnership that I was privileged to see up close and personally. And Baker tells a story on his self. He would say, I would go to the president saying, look, I don't think we ought to be doing this in this way. And the president would look at him, at his old friend, and say, remind me, Jim, am I the president and you're the advisor? I think I'll make this decision. So they had that kind of a relationship that John Meacham knows very well, in which they were at ease with each other. But the sum of their parts was greater than just the individual parts, I think it's fair to say.
You know, it made me think, Tom and John, you know, look, there's always a little bit of competition between Reagan and Bush. But let's be realistic. Bush wouldn't have been Bush without Reagan, but Reagan wouldn't have been Reagan without Bush and Baker.
Exactly.
I mean,
right.
let's be real. Bush brought to Reagan, the most important thing he brought to Reagan was Jim Baker. But it wasn't just Jim Baker, right, John?
Exactly right. There are wonderful turning points where things could have gone differently. One was in the early 1960s when Texas billionaires came to Bush and wanted him to leave the Republican Party and run as a Democrat. So that's one that didn't happen. And Jim Baker desperately trying to get a very competitive George Herbert Walker Bush to drop out of the 1980 presidential race before Bush wanted to, because he knew that the Reagans needed to see that Bush could be a team player. Right. And both President Bush, H.W. Bush, and 43 have said to me that neither one of them would have been president had Ronald Reagan not made that call on the Wednesday night of the convention to put Bush on the ticket.
The president's hearse has now arrived at the aircraft. Anita, let me bring you in here as we await the family to be escorted alongside the casket.
Well, this is clearly the most poignant, I think, for all of us to actually be seeing this. You know, there have been a lot of emotional moments just in different pictures and things that have been released. Okay.
Yeah, we'll watch here now as this ceremony begins.
Sure.
We just saw President George W. Bush and his siblings and their families boarding now the Air Force aircraft, the VIP aircraft that will be taking President George H.W. Bush to Washington, D.C. It's notable this is the third time that the body of an American president has been flown from Texas to Washington. President Kennedy, of course, in '63, President Johnson in '73, and now the 41st President of the United States. As we noted, a simple departure ceremony, the family boarding through the passenger door to greet the body of George H.W. Bush as it is placed on board the aircraft. As we noted, this is part of the fleet normally used as Air Force One. In this case, SAM 41 is its call sign today, Special Air Missions, as one of the two aircraft in this fleet is dedicated to this mission.
John, you were talking about a piece of music we're going to be hearing a lot.
We're going to be hearing
that we heard there. We're probably going to hear this quite a bit, aren't we?
We're going to hear it's Eternal Father, Strong to Save. It's the official hymn of the United States Navy, a favorite of Franklin Roosevelt's, a favorite of John Kennedy's. Daniel Patrick Moynihan recalled of the week of the Kennedy funeral, you couldn't walk down a street in Washington without hearing For Those in Peril on the Sea. It's a remarkable piece of music. It was the president's favorite, and it's a prayer, really. And of course he was in peril on the sea, and I think I've heard him hum it. Two people whose names he would want us to say quickly are the two men who died on the mission at Saturday, September 2nd of 1944. Del Delaney and Ted White were the two men. The president thought about them every day in the ensuing 3/4 of a century, and he would want them to be commemorated as well.
The Bush children have seen the passing of their father and their mother over the last 7 months. And I was thinking, John, as we were watching George W. Bush board the aircraft, how much did he rely, if at all, on his dad when he was president in terms of advice and guidance?
Emotionally, a great deal. In terms of pragmatic counsel, almost not at all. He did ask him about, contrary to myth, he did ask about the Iraq War. The former president told him at Christmas at Camp David in 2002 that if, as he put it, if the man won't comply, you've got to do what you've got to do. But they were, President Bush, interesting, the senior President Bush, as he said in the letter to President Clinton, he wasn't one to give advice. He did, I think part of it was, and Chuck covers these folks all the time, part of it was having been a president and a candidate and a vice president, he had spent decades being offered unsolicited advice.
So
and he
true.
didn't, you know what I mean? It's like, you got to do this. And you go through the president's library in College Station, and it's endless letters from all kinds of people. Spiro Agnew in the 1980s sending notes about what he should do. Richard Nixon couldn't stop writing letters. I think part of it was out of a deep respect for the office. 41 would not offer unless he was asked. 43 would occasionally ask. He asked about Bob Gates becoming Secretary of Defense. He wanted Jim Baker at that period when Donald Rumsfeld left. He wanted Baker to do what 43 called the Triple Crown, having been State, Treasury, and Defense. And he called his dad to ask about that. There were more conversations than we know or appreciate. But there was never a moment, and President Bush used to talk about this, there's never a moment they sat around at Walker's Point and the old man would say, here's what you got to do about Medicare. It just, the family dynamic was different.
Yeah, let me bring in Anita McBride on that point. Was this idea, this political legacy or political dynasty, if you will, is it something they talked about as a family, or did it just kind of unfold on its own?
No, I think that none of them liked that word, dynasty, at all. I don't think they saw themselves as that at all. They saw themselves as people committed to public service and wanting to serve the nation in the best ways that they can. And I think they're uncomfortable with words like dynasty. And also in George W. Bush, at the end of the 8 years of his administration, we couldn't use the L word around the White House legacy either. Those are not the things that they talked about. And he would often say, history, well, they're still writing about the first George. They're going to be writing about me a long time, from now. But looking at these images right now, as you showed us at the Ellington Air Base, I look now at George W. Bush. He's now the patriarch of this family. I wonder what that feels like for him. But the beautiful precision of the military and all the agents, as Andy knows, that George H.W. Bush affectionately called his Secret Service agents the marshals, that they are the ones, with him. Those are the things that they talk about, honoring the people who serve and who serve them so beautifully.
Anita, I get the sense that they truly understood they were custodians.
Yes, without a doubt.
They were not royalty, they were custodians to the nation.
Temporary custodians of incredibly important, it was a privilege, important positions where they could serve the nation in the time that they had and continue, to serve as private citizens in the afterlife, as George W. Bush calls it, and as H.W. Too, and Barbara Bush, how much they devoted their time in the post-White House life and raised incredible amounts of money for all kinds of charities and things that they cared about. That was part of their custodianship of being good citizens, and they were example to all of us.
And we're looking at some of the crowd that had gathered there, has gathered for this send-off. The aircraft has now been loaded. This Air Force VC-25, it's the military version of the Boeing 747, about to depart with the close family and the president himself for the about 3.5-hour journey to Washington, D.C. And then, of course, he will be returned later this week to Houston. Gabe Gutierrez is there on the ground at Ellington Field. Give us a sense of the color from what you could see there.
Hi there, Lester. An extremely powerful moment when President Bush's casket was removed from the hearse. Hail to the Chief was played, and you could see the friends and family with their hands over their hearts as that casket was loaded onto the aircraft. Such a powerful scene here at Ellington Field, and it started from earlier this morning when we saw a beautiful sunrise behind this aircraft, and certainly this is an entire community that is paying its respects to the 41st President of the United States. Also, his dog Sully was among the friends and family as they boarded the aircraft, Special Air Mission 41. Of course, his dog Sully, according to his family spokesman, will now end up spending his time with veterans at Walter Reed. So now, as this journey continues on to Washington, here in Texas, we are waiting some of the commemorative events later in the week. But Lester, I can tell you, from being right here, seeing the 41st President of the United States loaded onto this aircraft, extremely powerful few moments here at Ellington Field in Houston. Lester.
Yeah, hard not to be choked up at some of those moments as the family stood by and watched the casket taken out of the hearse and on board that airplane. We want to look ahead. The aircraft will be departing here shortly. We expect it to land in the Washington, D.C. area at Joint Base Andrews around 3:30-ish Eastern time today. Let me go to Casey Hunt. She's at Capitol Hill right now. Casey, give us a sense of what we can expect later in the day.
Well, Lester, we are here at the Capitol awaiting the final arrival of George H.W. Bush. He'll drive that 20 minutes or so in a motorcade from Andrews Air Force Base here to the United States Capitol. He, of course, a former member of Congress, in addition to all of the other distinguished titles that he held throughout his life. So we will see him, and you may be able to see behind me there are members of the United States military who are practicing right now, marking sections of chalk on the concrete where they will stand when the hearse arrives later today with the family. And then, of course, he will be taken inside to the Capitol Rotunda, where we will see a traditional ceremony of state. We saw recently one similar when John McCain, of course, passed away. And I think we can expect there to be a similar display of bipartisanship. It's not necessarily usual that the leaders of both chambers from both parties present the wreaths at the casket, but we do expect that to happen here later tonight in the case of George H.W. Bush. And I think that really makes a statement that this Congress wants to send in a time, of course, that we are living in of such division. Of course, the funeral that ultimately will take place at the National Cathedral. We can also report former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney is going to deliver one of the eulogies. Former Senate Republican whip Alan Simpson, who served in the Congress when George H.W. Bush was president, as well as President George W. Bush, his son, and of course, our own John Meacham, President Bush's biographer, will all give eulogies at that funeral at the National Cathedral. That, of course, not taking place until later in the week. Lester.
And John Meacham with us right here. That's a tall order.
It is. It is. But I expect you to be kind and gentle.
People root for you. They're not rooting against you in this one.
Yeah.
It's a great honor. He was a great man, and we live in the sunlight of many of his achievements. He always said, when he would be pressed, what do you want people to remember about you? He didn't like that kind of question. But several different occasions in the past couple of years, he would give the same answer, which was, didn't get everything right, made some mistakes, but we always put the country first.
Did he, you know, the notion that he didn't get everything right, did he ever express regrets about the 88, the tone of the 88 campaign?
He didn't like, he understood that the tone was too harsh. He understood that in real time. And in fact, the day after the election, he said, that's history. As if, and there was a very clearly bifurcated part of George H.W. Bush. He believed that campaigning and governance were two different things. It's one of the reasons that he didn't leave an ideology behind him. He left, his ideology was friendship. It was personal connection. It was loyalty to him. It was service to country. But it was not philosophically motivated. He was the most competitive man who ever drew breath. Jim Baker will tell you that. He had two modes. He was the competitor who wanted to succeed. To serve, he had to succeed. And to preside, he had to prevail. And in his mind, the ends did in fact justify the means. And what I think redeems him as a biographer is that every time he had ultimate power, he did the right thing against interest.
Yeah. Let me bring in Tom Brokaw. Tom, what do you remember from that yin and yang of the 88 campaign and then the presidency of George H.W. Bush?
Well, it was a very tough campaign, and he had on his side some of the toughest players, including Roger Ailes, obviously. And Ailes once told me a story when they were in some trouble against Michael Dukakis that he went to the president and said, we got to get tougher, and he was the vice president at the time, we got to get tougher on Dukakis. And George Bush said, I'm not sure I want to go there. He said, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, we're not going to win unless we get tougher. And Ailes said, finally, he said to him, okay, but don't tell Barr. That was Barbara, his wife. He didn't want her to hear that they were about to unload on him. And of course, they did get a lot of tougher on him. And depending on your point of view, you know, that was a campaign that was, on both sides, very difficult indeed. But between Lee Atwater and Roger Ailes, you know, they only played one game, which is down, hard, and bare-fisted.
I had the honor of meeting President George H.W. Bush one time. I was a local anchor in Chicago. It was a few days before the election in '92, and they were having local reporters do quick, you know, interviews with him. And it was aboard Air Force One, flying between Detroit and Newark. And I remember making some uncomfortable, nervous joke about, well, if I knew the plane was so nice, maybe I should run for president. And I remember he laughed at me and kind of looked and said, you know, somebody to the effect, you can have it. I mean, at that point, he seemed to have accepted his fate. I think this was about 3 days before the election.
Very much so. The presidential diary, and he dictated 2, 3, 4 times a week into a tape recorder. He actually made a point of always paying for the little tape recorders, the little tapes, and the batteries, because it would be seen as private.
Personal, not government
exactly.
property. Oh, nice.
Exactly. And
batteries too.
And
smart.
so it's this record of, it's just a dismal, it's painful listening and reading through the 1992 campaign, culminating in what I think is the most affecting piece of political documentation I've ever encountered, which is he's in bed with Mrs. Bush in the Houstonian, Suite 271 of the Houstonian Hotel, which is where he stayed, on the night Clinton defeats him. and he can't go to sleep. Mrs. Bush has gone to sleep. He gets up, he goes into the living room, he turns on the tape recorder, and he's whispering so he doesn't disturb her. And he says, I thought the country was about duty, honor, country, but maybe that's passé. Maybe my time has passed. And it's this raw emotion. But then he says, so that's one part of Bush, right? But here's the other. Then he says, finish strong, be kind to people, be positive, write notes to everyone, make this a great transition. This is a wonderful country. He unloaded therapeutically, talking to himself. He didn't talk to, he never whined to other people. He hated that. He hated the idea that presidents said it was the loneliest job. He said, you're just damn lucky to be there. So he always, to go to Chuck's point, he always had that sense. So he unloaded. He told his diary that sort of what he was feeling as he lost the most powerful office in the world. But then he said, tell the truth, be strong. The next day, he's driving with his son Marvin in the motorcade from Andrews to the White House, and a young soldier salutes as he goes by, and he dissolves into tears because he thought, I hope I haven't let that soldier down.
This is, we've lost John McCain this year, we've lost Bush 41. Is this a time of reflection for this country, where we've been and where we are?
I think it is, and I certainly think it's a time for reflection politically within the Republican Party, as you think about two of these pillars of the Republican Party that were in some ways ostracized.
Sure.
I mean, let's be realistic, right? And Trump's election sent the message that the Bushes are no longer supposed to be around this Republican Party, and frankly, you either, John McCain, right, at the time. So sure, I think it's a time of reflection. You know, I've been thinking about him. You know, George H.W. Bush feels like a man who should have been president before cable television, before Hollywood, before the celebrification of what we've done to this, whatever we're in the era now. He was sort of caught Reagan, sort of, you know, we were fits and starts of celebrifying things. Now, of course, you could argue with Bill Clinton, it's been celebrity nonstop.
And there is SAM 41, Special Air Mission 41, the call sign for this very special flight from the Houston area, Ellington Field to Washington, D.C. now. Departing for that 3.5-hour journey here to Washington, D.C., where there will be, of course, be an arrival ceremony at Joint Base Andrews this afternoon. And the body of Bush 41 will be brought to the U.S. Capitol just behind us, where he will lie in state. We will, of course, come back on the air to bring you all of that when it occurs, roughly 3.5 hours from now. For now, I'm Lester Holt. John Meacham and Chuck Todd and Tom Brokaw and the rest of our team, thank you for watching, and we'll see you a bit later. Take care.